Is there seriously anything more beautiful than hundreds of half square triangles that are perfectly trimmed and stacked up beautifully?
Empty hearts and neon lights.
So last month I used a lot of my blue scrap fabric for this Scrappy Wave quilt behind me. And with every flying geese block in that quilt, I did the stitch and flip method on the corners and got 2 bonus half square triangles with every flying geese there. So I ended up with a lot of these little darling half square triangles. So my scrappy quilt back there is going to actually make a bonus scrappy quilt. And I think that is why scraps just keep multiplying. We will never not have scraps if we make a quilt. Now, I could just use all of the blue half square triangles that I made from the Scrappy Wave quilt, but I wanted to have some fun. I wanted this quilt to have a little bit of pizzazz to it, so I decided to add in an accent color. So I'm adding in the red fabric and I'm pulling in some more background fabric to make a really fun bonus quilt design. I am so excited to share this bonus quilt with you. I think you're really going to love the pattern because it is just one quilt block and that'll bring the whole quilt together. So unless you are super ambitious with your stitch and flip quilting and haven't already trimmed any of your bonus half square triangles, you'll want to press and trim these down to 2.5-inch squares. I am not that person. I am not someone who will get this done right when I am sewing another quilt that I was working on. So I had to press and trim all of my blue half square triangles to 2.5 inches. I trimmed my half square triangles down using a 2.5-inch trim lock. It made quick work of it because we need 320 blue half square triangles for this quilt. So that is a lot of trimming. Now, just a note, you do not have to use blue. You could use whatever color you have from any stitch and flip you have, or you can make your half square triangles yourself. You can choose whatever fabric you would like and make up this quilt. You'll just need 320 of them and then an accent fabric to get the design that I'm pulling together. So for this quilt with the accent half square triangles, we are going to need 64 of these. And since I'm adding on the accent, I didn't have them made already, so I will show you how to make the half square triangles using the method I prefer, which is the 2 at a time method. So for the 2 at a time half square triangle method, you will need the fabric that is your printed fabric and a background fabric. Now these are cut to 3-inch squares to be able to make 2 half square triangles that are 2.5 inches. So to use this method, you're going to place your 2 fabrics right sides together. And then a lot of people like to draw a line diagonally from corner to corner. So drawing the line might be easier to do on the back side of the fabric before you put them right sides together. So let me show you that. So you have your line, and then what you would do is sew a 1/4-inch seam along each side of that drawn line. I don't usually draw the line on my fabric. I'll use diagonal seam tape that is on my sewing machine as a guide, but this makes it really consistent and easy if you just draw the line. All right, so I have stitches along each side of the drawn diagonal line, and they are about 1/4 of an inch or a scant 1/4 of an inch away from the line down the diagonal. Now I'm just going to press this just to make sure that it is nice, flat, and even. And then we will cut it in half right along that diagonal. All right, and then we're going to press the seam. I like to press toward the darker fabric here. They're both pretty light, but I'm gonna just keep it consistent with all my other blue fabrics and press toward the printed fabric. All right, and since I want this seam to lay ultra flat, I'm going to use some liquid starch and just apply it along that seam. And then I'm going to press it again and it'll just lay super, super flat for me. Now with this starch that I am using, I'm going to let this dry for a little bit before I press it or I'll get a lot of residue left behind. What I typically do when I am pressing a lot of half square triangles like this, I will lay a bunch of them out and press them, apply the liquid starch. And as I work through all of them, they're just all laid out. The ones that I did first are gonna get pretty dry. So when I'm done pressing all of them, I can usually go back to the first ones, start pressing those, and get them all done that way. Maybe it takes a little more time, but it is worth it for me to get these all flat. They're much easier to sew. Everything comes together really nicely. So putting in the little bit of extra work, I think really makes a huge difference here on a quilt like this that is going to have a lot of seams coming together and a lot of bulk. So take the extra time if you can. All right, so I'm going to press the seams. And you can already see the difference with how flat that one is laying. It is really worth the little bit of extra effort to take the step to do this. I feel like for especially these blocks that are going to be this small. I feel like the tinier you get, the less forgiving it is if you are off just a little bit. All right, so the final step is to trim these down to that 2.5-inch square. So I line up the diagonal lines on my trim lock. Now, if you have another method you like to use for trimming up half square triangles, definitely use that method. I just think, especially when I'm doing a lot of these, this little trim tool is so handy because you can trim it so fast. So there we go, a perfect 2.5-inch half square triangle. Quick, quick, quick. And we only need 64 of these accent ones. All right, so there are our accent half square triangles. All right, so let's quickly go back through all the fabric that you'll need for this quilt. So you'll need 320 half square triangles that are your main fabric. For me, that is the blue half square triangles. Then you'll need 64 accent half square triangles. I'm using the red for the accent. And then you're going to need some background fabric. So I cut 192 background squares that are 2.5 inches. So I just used this cream fabric that was very similar to what I used in my scrappy wave quilt, just to keep everything flowing nicely. All right, so now that we have all of the fabric prepped, we have all of our main fabric, which is the blue for me half square triangles ready, all of the accent half square triangles, and all the background fabric cut and ready to go. We're going to take a look at the block layout for this quilt. So here is the block layout, and this is everything that you need for one block. All right, so I am here as future Fallon to let you know that that layout I just started to show you is completely wrong. So yeah, I filmed the tutorial with the wrong layout and made a bunch of blocks with the wrong layout, then realized that is not the layout. This is the layout. You'll have a nice straight line across there to form the pinwheel. So future Fallon now knows how to do this block correctly, and I'm going to give you the proper tutorial for putting this block together, and then I'll go back and fix that. So don't listen to past Fallon that recorded a completely wrong recording. Listen to this future Fallon who's going to give you the correct layout and tutorial. Oh. Yeah, so let me know your biggest mistake, because in quilting that is, because it's kind of frustrating to have a stack of blocks you have to unsew. So I'm gonna get back to sewing these blocks the correct way, and yeah, check out the correct tutorial now. All right, so here is the layout for the one quilt block we'll be making. You can see there are 3 background squares, 1 accent square, and then 5 of your main fabric to complete one block. Now, because this one block is going to be made into a 4 patch to create a pinwheel, I'll often lay out 4 of these at a time just to make sure I like the layout. But what is really fun is that even though it kind of gives a different look depending on how the block is turned, they are all sewn together in the same way. So you can just stack them up on design boards and get going with the project. Now I bring this over to the sewing machine and I sew the first 2 squares in the row together, right sides together, sew a 1/4 inch seam. Then I don't cut the thread and I move on to the next 2 squares in row 2, sew them right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam, and then move on to the 3rd one, do the same thing. I don't cut any of the threads because it creates kind of a net holding all of the blocks together. Then I'll go and add on the 3rd square in each row. I'll press the seams open. This will reduce a lot of the bulk for me. And then I will sew the rows together to finish off the block. And then of course I'm going to press the seams open again. Once I get 4 blocks finished, I can sew them all together into a 4 patch. So here's what these 4 blocks together look like. What a cute 4 patch, and I love how the accent red comes together to make a pinwheel, and then the 4 blocks together make a larger pinwheel with that accent pinwheel in the middle. It is so cute. Then once I get all the 4 patches done, I will sew the rows together and complete the quilt top. Now, I wouldn't say this is a quick sew. Obviously, all these half square triangles take time, but I do think this is a fun quilt to sew together, especially if you are wanting to use up some of your stitch and flips from previous quilt projects. As long as you have an accent fabric for that little inner pinwheel, I think you're gonna have a quilt with a big impact if you sew this one together. So after I get the quilt top finished, I'm just going to find a backing I like, base this quilt, quilt it, and bind it to finish it off. So in an effort to not add to my unfinished projects this year, whenever I start a project for my channel, I'm actually going to try to finish it this year. That might be hard, I might fall off that goal, but I'm going to try to stick to it as much as I can. So I did finish up this quilt, and if you take a look at it, when it comes together, you can see all of these different patterns that try to show up within the quilt, and I think it looks just amazing. I'm so happy with how it turned out. Now, because I have a lot of projects that I want to finish this year, and since I'm trying to finish the ones that I start this year, I did do some simple straight line quilting on this quilt, but I think the way I did it really helps pop the pattern within the quilt. I think it fits the quilt very beautifully. Even though it's simple quilting, I really think it helps the design stand out in this quilt. So in the comments, let me know if you would choose to do this pattern in a different colorway. I really think each block would look great in a different color, kind of bringing in a rainbow design. Let me know what you think. Let me know if this is a quilt pattern you plan to make. I love quilts that are just made from one simple quilt block. They're easy to work on whenever you have time and bring a beautiful quilt together. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.